3, 2, 1.
Hi everyone, welcome to this week's talk. This is the second talk on the online bee biosecurity talk series. My name's Rebecca Laws. I'm the Bee Biosecurity Officer for Queensland. I'm also joined tonight by Susie and Kelly, who are helping me out with the IT and strategic side of things. And I've also got a couple of special guests tonight. Hopefully, if we can get him online, we have Trevor Weatherhead from the Australian Honeybee Industry Council. And we also have one of our APIA officers here in Queensland, Hamish Lamb, and they're going to be helping me out with the question and answer section. So since last week, I've had a few inquiries from people interstate and overseas, and welcome. It's fantastic to have you guys as listeners. I do just want to quickly remind you, though, that some of the things that I'm talking about are specific to Queensland, in particular, some of the legislation. So wherever possible, check with your local beekeeping club or check with your local government department to make sure that you have the right information for your local area, as it does change from place to place. If you missed last week's recording or last week's talk, you can tune in. They're all recorded after the event. They'll be available, and you can access them by clicking on the original link you had or the link that you got through your registration. And we're also posting all of those links in the question and answer section tonight. So you can catch up at any time with those recordings. Now, last week we talked about bee biosecurity basics, and I'll just do a quick refresher before we start and move on to tonight's talk. So last week we talked about the key steps for good bee biosecurity, and these were making sure you register as a beekeeper and mark your hives with your allocated hive identification number, practice good bee husbandry, check your hives regularly for pests and diseases, and we'll talk about that a lot more tonight. Reporting notifiable pests and diseases, ensuring you only buy or use equipment that has come from a source that you know is clean or has been irradiated before you use it. If you have lots of hives, ensure you instigate a barrier system, and practicing go clean, come clean, so you don't spread weeds or other animal pests and diseases. So tonight's talk is focusing on bee brood diseases. Now, if you remember from last week, we talked about the importance of checking your hives for pests and diseases and the steps involved, starting with an external observation of your hive, an internal observation of the hive boxes, a brood examination, which is what we're going to focus on tonight, a drone uncapping and sugar shake or alcohol wash, which is what we'll cover in the next talk in 2 weeks' time. And we're going to talk a little bit tonight about some of the other tests you might need to do, such as a matchstick test. So what is a brood inspection? Well, the brood are the baby bees, and the brood are found in the bottom box of the hive. So you've got your lid, you've got boxes on top which have honey in them called supers. Then you'll have a queen excluder that stops the queen going up to where the honey is. And in that bottom box underneath the queen excluder is your brood. That is the part we're going to focus on tonight. Now, if at all possible, it's important to try and examine all of the frames in your brood box. If this isn't possible though, if you're really pressed for time, try and focus on those middle 3 frames. The ones in the middle are more likely to have brood, and therefore that's where you're likely to see those pests and diseases. So once you've got the lid off and the supers off and the queen excluder off, and you've given your bees a bit of a puff of smoke to calm them down, one of the first things you want to do then is to locate your queen. If you can't locate your queen, that's okay. We can still do a brood examination, but it does help if you can put her aside in a queen cage or take the frame and put it somewhere safe with the queen on it until you complete your brood examination. If you can't, if you're not very good at finding the queen, which I definitely was when I started as a beekeeper, every time you do anything with those frames in that brood box, make sure that the bees that are coming off the brood box go back into it. So off the frame, go back into your brood box so you don't lose your queen, because that can lead to the collapse of your hive. So that's not a good thing. So make sure your queen going back in the brood box. Once you've got your frame out, you're sure you haven't got the queen on there, or if you're not sure, making sure it's over the brood box, give your frame a good sharp little shake just to get those bees off it so you can see the brood and it's nice and clear from the bees. So taking those some of those middle frames, have a good look once it's clear. The first thing you want to look for is eggs or larvae on those frames. If you haven't seen a queen, if you can see eggs or very young larvae, it means that there's likely to be a queen in there and she's actively laying. So that's a good sign and just a good health check for your hive. Then you want to examine the brood. So there'll be a range of different types of cells on your frame. Some might be empty, some might have eggs in them that'll look just like a little rod in the bottom of the cell. Some might have young larvae, older larvae, or they might be capped. So have a look at all of those different types of cells. First, look at the overall pattern. You can see on the picture in the bottom on the left, we've got a healthy frame with healthy brood. The pattern is that the brood is quite even, moving from more mature through to less mature brood as you go. On the right-hand side, you can see brood that has signs of diseases, and it has an uneven or shotgun pattern. And this is a sign that there could be something wrong with your hive and you need to look a bit closer. Another key, another key sign is the cells themselves that are capped. Are they dark and shrunken and concave or have holes in the cappings? These are other signs that you might have some kind of brood disease. If they're healthy, they should be level or raised, and they should be fairly pale in colour. If there are holes in the cell tops or cappings, it's not always a sign necessarily of disease. Sometimes it just means that the cell hasn't been closed off properly. However, it's a good thing to do to have a closer look. And so grab a matchstick or a similar size stick and gently push the wax away from the edges so you can have a good look at the larvae inside the cell and see if they look healthy. So a healthy larvae should be lying on its side, as you can see on the left-hand side, and it should be pearly white with a little orangey or yellowy coloured gut line. If your larvae looks sort of dead, if it looks shrunken, mouldy, or it could look like it's in a sac, these are all signs that you might have a disease and you should look a little closer. Another key sign is the smell in the hive. Now, when you open up your beehive, it should smell delicious. It should smell like honey. It should smell lovely. However, if you open up your hive and it smells foul, like it does animals in there, not very nice, or quite acidic, that's another sign of disease. So have a closer look. Now, when we have a closer look, grab your little matchstick in any of the cells that you're a little bit suspect about that have any of those signs of diseases and poke it in those cells and see what comes out when you pull the matchstick out. I'm going to talk about the diseases in a little more detail in a moment, but I'm just going to give you an overview now of what you might see when you pull that matchstick out. You might have a thick, ropey, pale or caramel coloured goo, and this is a sign that you might have American or European foulbrood disease.
Hi, Trevor, it's Kelly Boltby calling. How are you?
Kelly, we can hear you.
Okay, so we're just trying to talk you through and see if I can do this. I'm just not sure because I don't know how it works. I'm coming in with an account that
or chalk-like.
Yeah, as a
and these are
presenter in these. So
right,
right. So you say you downloaded the Teams app.
Hold on just a moment, everyone. So they might be chalk-like or hard, shrunken larvae, or right through to a black mould colour. And that's a sign of chalk brood. You might have sac brood.
I am a bit worried that we're not going to get you on.
Quite a sac. They could also look like their heads are poking out of the cell. So as we said before, healthy larvae should be lying on their side. If they're not lying on their side, if they're twisted or have the head poking up, that's a disease sign, and it often means that you have sac brood. Now we're going to talk a bit more detail now about these diseases, and we're going to start with the foulbroods. There's two types, American and European foulbrood, that are quite common, and it can be really difficult to tell the difference between these two different types of foulbrood without a lab test. Now, if you put your stick in there and the goo comes out and 3 to 5 centimetres long, that's often a sign that it's AFB, or American foulbrood, if your goo comes out and it's less than this, it's less than 1.5 centimetres long, the string of goo, this can be a sign that it's EFB or European foulbrood. However, unfortunately, there's often secondary infections that travel around with EFB that make it look exactly like AFB. And so hence you really need a lab test to be quite sure whether or not you've got EFB or AFB. Now, it's important to know the difference, to know whether you have EFB or AFB, because they're managed very, very differently. American foulbrood is a bacterial disease, and it tends to weaken and almost always eventually kills your hive, unfortunately. It's a reportable disease, and as we talked about last week, that means that if you have it or you suspect you have it, you need to report it to the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries. It is, unlike EFB, it forms these spores. So it lives in two different states, a vegetative state and a spore state. And that vegetative state is when it's reproducing, and the spore stage is like a resting stage. And when it's in that spore stage, it's very, very tough. So the spores remain viable for over 50 years. So what this means as a beekeeper is that you might have a beehive that has AFB, and you can put it in your back shed for 45 years and no bees could touch it. And it's got no bees in it, and you can pull it out, put bees in it again, and that beehive will still get AFB. And that's just because it's such a long-lasting spore and so resilient. It's very hard to kill, so not very many things will be able to kill AFB spores, and it's also really easily spread. So it's such a difficult disease to manage. Now, the symptoms of AFB include your cells will be sunken and dark. And these early signs, you might only see in the early stages a couple of cells that have this, but so it's really important to try and catch it early when you see even just a few cells. It could be that those cells aren't capped, so they've got holes in them. And these ones are the ones as well that you want to have a look at. I have a further investigation. Stick your matchstick in there and you should see that ropey goo come out for AFB. In the later stages of AFB infection, some of the symptoms include having low brood numbers, so very few bees, irregular brood patterns, and that foul smell that smells very much like a sulphur dead animal kind of smell. You might also see larvae that are a bit older that have been infected with AFB that'll have their tongues sticking out. So they'll be dead little dried up larvae and their tongues will stick out the top of the cell. So those are later stage symptoms of AFB. In the early stages, you might not smell the strong smell and you might not see some of those irregular brood patterns. And so it's important to look for both the early and later stage indicators that you have AFB. Now, the disease spreads pretty easily. It spreads through robber bees that we talked about in our last talk, and these are bees that are going from one hive to another to steal honey or pollen from them, and when they do that, they either take disease with them or they might just bring disease back with them. And drift as well, so those bees that are going accidentally back to the wrong hives, and again, can take disease with them or bring disease back with them. It can also be spread through infected hives or infected equipment. So anything that has wax, honey or pollen on it may spread AFB. And it can also be spread through feeding bees honey or pollen. And so if your bees are fed honey or pollen, you can then have, if that's infected, a spread of the disease. Now, once the spores have made it their way into your hive, they're accidentally fed by those nurse bees with honey to the larvae. And once the spores get into the gut of the larvae, they consume the larvae from within, which is pretty horrible. And so often the spores end up being spread all around the hive when those dead larvae are trying to be removed from the hive by the worker bees inside the hive. If you have AFB, or you suspect you do, the first thing to do is to isolate any equipment that you've been using on that particular hive that you suspect might be diseased. If you do go and use them on another hive, that hive may become infected. And then once you're sure you have AFB and not EFB, so wait till your test comes back, seal your hive up and wait till the night time when all your bees have returned for the night, and then get some tape and tape that hive up so they can't escape. And then very sadly, you have to kill all of the bees in your hive. There's a few different ways that you could go about this. If you've got the facilities to do so, you can place your brood box with all the bees in it in the freezer for at least a week. It can take quite a long time to kill them, and try and remove as many resources from the hive before you put it in there. So shake the bees off and remove any of the frames with honey, because that will just prolong the process if there's honey left in there. Another option is to shake your bees into a bucket of soapy water, or you can drench them using buckets of soapy water, so pouring over the top. If you intend to destroy your hive, you can use a pesticide powder, any pesticide powder which is registered for use on bees in Australia. Now, once your bees are dead, you've got a couple of different options. You can either sterilise your hives or you can destroy them. So to sterilise your hives, first remove all the honey or debris out of the hive. Seal your hives up in some plastic, very heavy-duty plastic bags or plastic sheeting. And then in Queensland, there's only one commercial place that you can sterilise your hives, and that is Sterilisation. Their website has a lot of really excellent information on how to prepare your hives for sterilisation and all the costings and all of that, so you can look that up. Now, to ensure that you successfully got rid of your AFB out of your hive when you sterilise, you need to use at least 10 kilograms of radiation. However, there are two options that you will be provided with, and one is 10 and one is 15 of kilograms of radiation. Now, the higher level of 15 kilograms will kill most other things, and so we suggest that if you can, to go for that high level of radiation, so you can be sure that your hive is clean of everything, just in case there's something else lurking in there. However, if your hive is plastic or it's a flow hive, the higher level of radiation degrades the plastic, and so you can't really go to that higher level because your plastic in your hive will go brittle. So in those cases, then you need to drop back to that lower level of radiation, the 10 kilograms. Now, radiation is a very safe way of treating your hive. It doesn't leave you any residue in there, and you are ready to put your bees straight away back into a nice clean hive. Your other option is destroying your hive. Firstly, you need to make sure that there isn't a fire ban on, and make sure you have the appropriate permit to light a fire. You want to dig a bit of an area, a trench or a pit, to put all of the components from the hive into that pit and anything else you need to destroy that's become decontaminated, and then burn it all in a very hot fire so it goes down to very little ashes, and then bury all of that at least 30 centimetres deep. Now, things that aren't perishable, such as your hive tool, you can sterilise these using a very hot flame. The flame that you have in your smoker is not quite hot enough. You'd need to get something a little hotter than that, such as a blowtorch. Now, the next disease I'm going to talk about is European foulbrood disease. It again is a bacterial disease, and it causes your hive to become weak, and in some cases it will kill your hive. Again, like AFB, it's very easily spread, but unlike AFB, it can be treated, and this is because it doesn't form those very long-lasting resistant spores that AFB does. So the symptoms of EFB are almost the same as those of AFB. So your irregular brood patterns, your cell cappings that are dark or concave. You might also see dead or discoloured larvae, so there'll be a yellowy browny colour. Your larvae might be twisted or curled in the cell. And EFB has more of a sort of a sour ammonia. Someone said to me once, smells like rotten oranges kind of smell. The ropiness, as we suggested before, when you stick that matchstick into the cell and pull it out again, the goo that comes out will be less than 0.15 centimetres. But remembering, if it's longer than that, it could still be EFB. It may have a secondary infection that's making it look like it's AFB and not EFB. And if the infection has been there for a long time, you might have larval scales that are dark, rubbery type scales of the larvae that are pushed up against the side of the cell. So EFB spreads just like AFB through robber bees and drift, infected hives and equipment, and bees that have fed infected pollen or honey. Once that bacteria goes into the hive, instead of like AFB that consumes the whole larvae from within, the EFB bacteria compete with the larvae in the gut for food. So they don't always kill the larvae, but once the larvae, if they do survive, go out in amongst the hive, the feces will contain the spores of the EFB or the bacteria, the EFB bacteria, and will spread it through the hive. If you have EFB, it can be treated, and it can be treated by using the antibiotic oxytetracycline hydrochloride, or OTC. There are two different ways that you can get it. It could be already mixed, so in the format of brood mix or tetrasin 10 soluble powder, or it could require mixing. Now, the one that requires mixing is a little trickier because you have to make sure you've got the amount correct and the dilution correct. Both of these should be used as a dry powder. Now, the antibiotics are available from your vet, but you may need to have a positive EFB lab report before you'll be dispensing antibiotics. And that's because the vet just needs to make sure that it's definitely EFB that you have and not AFB, just so we don't get it the wrong one. And that's because if you treat AFB with antibiotics, it may subdue the symptoms for a short period of time, but you will continue to get the infection because the antibiotics don't work when it's in that spore form. And you're usually required to keep a record of which hives you've treated with antibiotics and when you treated them and how much you used. So make sure you keep that record. Now, the next disease we're going to talk about is chalkbrood. Now, chalkbrood is a fungal disease and it weakens and reduces the yields in your hive. It's a pretty common disease and a lot of hives had it. I recently did a trip right up to North Queensland, and many of the hives that I looked at had just one or two cells that were infected with chalkbrood. And usually chalkbrood becomes worse in times of stress, when there's temperature change or drought. The symptoms of chalkbrood are that either in the cells you'll see these white chalky looking mummies. They could be white, grey, or even right through to black. They could also be in other parts of the hive. So often they accumulate in the bottom box, so in the bottom of the brood box, or they can accumulate around the entrance of the hive as well, where they have been removed by the nurse bees. Now, the infected brood that have been capped already, sometimes you can detect these by taking the frame out and giving a little bit of a shake, and you'll hear a rattling noise, and those are those dead infected mummies inside the capped cells. Now, the disease spreads, chalkbrood spreads through infected hives and equipment. It also spreads through those robber bees and drift again, and it spreads through bees visiting infected water sources. So if an infected bee comes to the water source, some of those fungal spores will fall off and they might be picked up by another bee who isn't infected and will then spread that infection back to their hive. Once in the hive, the spores are fed to the larvae accidentally again with the honey, and like EFB, the spores germinate in the gut and they compete with the larvae for nutrients within the gut. The spores then tend to be spread around the hive when those dead larvae are tried to be removed from the hive by the nurse bees. If you have chalkbrood, unfortunately, there's not a whole lot you can do about it. One of the key things you can do is to ensure you have good bee husbandry. And those are the things that we talked about last talk, like leaving your bees with plenty of honey over autumn and winter and feeding them if conditions get really poor, reducing the number of boxes when bee numbers get low, requeening regularly, and replacing your brood comb regularly as well. If you also remove any infected frames, particularly ones that are heavily infected, and replacing them with clean ones, and get rid of any mummies that are lying around at the bottom of the hive or around the hive entrance and destroy those. Being a fungal disease, it can also help to make sure that your hive is placed in a sunny position and somewhere quite warm. The next disease we're going to talk about is sackbrood. Now, sackbrood is usually only a problem in hives when the hive is quite stressed. Like chalkbrood, it may tick over in very low levels in your hive and only have big outbreaks when the hive isn't doing so well. It's a viral disease and it tends to affect the larvae mostly, but can impact on adult workers as well. Unlike the diseases we've talked about before, sackbrood is only really viable outside a live bee for a short period of time, so around 4 weeks. So hives that haven't got bees in them and have been made bee-proof can be put aside for several months and then should be free of sackbrood because of the very short period of time of the activity of that or viability of that virus. Now, the symptoms of sackbrood, the key one here is having discoloured or sunken perforated brood cappings, and inside of those you'll see the larvae have formed a tough fluid-filled looking sac. It could be, as you can see in the picture in the top here, anywhere from a pale colour that looks quite full of fluid right through to a very shrunken sac that looks quite dry and quite dark. Your larvae may also be poking their little heads out of the top of the cellars, as you can see in the picture at the bottom. To the left, you'll see a healthy larvae in the picture lying on its side, and then the one with the sackbrood has got its head poking out. The yellowish or brownish colour of that larvae there is also a good indicator that it's likely to have sackbrood. Sackbrood spread through robber bees and drift, and also through infected hives and equipment. Once those virus particles are in the hive, the virus multiplies within the larvae, and again, when the bees come in to remove those dead larvae, as they do that, those virus particles get spread throughout your hive, increasing your level of infection. Now, if you have sackbrood, if it's in very low frequency within your hive, so less than 5% of your brood is infected, it's likely that it will recover on its own. However, if more than 5% of the brood are infected, we suggest that it's a good time to consider requeening, just because then if you've got a fresh queen, you've got lots of brood coming out, and you're more likely that the hive will be able to keep on top of the disease. Also, replacing any infected combs with fresh combs can help reduce the level of infection. And again, ensuring you've got good bee husbandry. Clean hives and equipment, leaving plenty of honey for the bees over winter, feeding them if you need to, reducing the number of boxes, requeening, and replacing that brood comb regularly. Now, there may be a range of other diseases that you might come across that are less common. So if your brood has symptoms that don't fit any of the diseases that we've talked about tonight, you may have a less common disease. So send a sample away for testing, and in the meantime, make sure you don't use any of your equipment on any other hives so you don't spread the disease any further. Of course, if you're unsure, call your BBO or your local apiary officer. And there's plenty more information out there. So the Australian Honeybee Industry Biosecurity Code of Practice has some great information. There's also the Biosecurity Manual for Beekeepers, the Be Aware website, which is lots of details and a lot more photos than I showed you tonight of those different pests and diseases. So it's a great resource. I've had lots of people in the last couple of weeks contact me about the Biosecurity for Bees online training, and that also will give you more information about the diseases we've talked about. And of course, call your BBO or give me an email, call your local apiary officer. And another key thing that you can really do to learn more about pests and diseases is joining your local beekeeping club. So it's time for questions now, and so I'm going to go over to, give me 2 seconds, there we go, and see what questions we've got coming in on the Q&A session. There we go. Okay. Here's a great question, and I'll kick it off by answering this one. Does darker brood cells always mean that a disease is present? Not always. Over time, you'll find that the wax in your frames will become darker with use, and so if all over your frame is looking like it's dark, if it's not just in patches, that may be that it's an older frame and it's time to switch that out. looking for those dark cells is really just one of the things that you need to look for. So make sure that if you see it's darker, have a closer look. See if the pattern is even throughout the whole frame and investigate any cells that look a little darker or that might be shrunken. So great question. Another question here we've got that's come in. Do you recommend pouring petrol into a sealed hive to kill bees? Pouring petrol in is effective in killing bees, but it is also quite dangerous, and that's why we don't currently recommend that one. Okay, we got more questions there, Susie?
Rebecca, there's no more questions online, but I'll just let everyone know that we do have Trevor Weatherhead online as well if people want to ask more questions.
Fantastic, I'm glad he made it on. Great. Another question here, and I will throw this one to Trevor. This one is, where can we purchase the test kits and what is the cost per test? I'm assuming this one's for AFB.
Rebecca, I'm not sure if Trevor can get through, it seems, but I might have a go at it. So it's Hamish here. The AFB test kits are popular in New South Wales because that's where they originate, and I think they sell for around $20. So the issue there is if you have access to the lab in Queensland, it is a free test to do a brood test, not a honey test, but a brood test. So perhaps that's the more economic way for the Queensland beekeepers to check if they've got AFB or not.
Thanks, Hamish. Oh, there we go. Got some more questions coming in now. What is the one question here? What is the humane way of killing the bees? Probably the most humane way would be to put them in the freezer. They will think it's winter time, it's getting cold, it's getting dark, it's getting quiet, and they'll eventually sort of slow down and go to sleep. So that's the most humane way, if you can manage it, to kill your bees. I know it's a really sad thing to have to do, and when I had to do it myself once, it was traumatic. But overall, in preventing the spread of AFB, it will mean that far less hives will end up dying and far fewer bees end up dying if you treat that AFB really quickly and very carefully. I'll throw this one over to you, Hamish. Is AFB or EFB worse?
Oh, thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, obviously AFB, American foulbrood disease, because that's the one that there isn't treatment for. The bees have to be killed. With EFB, European foulbrood disease, it is treatable, and in some cases on good nutrition or some management, you can find your way out of EFB symptoms and the effects naturally. So it's definitely AFB is the worst.
Yeah, I would agree. I've had AFB and it was pretty traumatic. Another question here, requesting what the cost for the radiation is. I would suggest that you have a look at the Steritech website. I know it depends on how many hives that you want to get irradiated, and many of the local beekeepers in the clubs will get together and send their hives together, because it is much cheaper if you put a whole load through, like a whole pallet through, rather than a single hive. I think when I did mine quite a few years ago, it was between $100 and $200 to have one hive irradiated. So it's not cheap, but if you can band together with other beekeepers, it can make it much cheaper. And it can be cheaper if you've got something like a flow hive, which is quite expensive to purchase a new hive. Another great question here, and I'll answer this one quickly, which is, can I confirm if AFB is reportable in Queensland? Yes, definitely reportable. So you need to let us know as soon as you possibly can that you have AFB. However, if you submit a sample to the lab, that is considered sufficient reporting. If you don't, some people see they've got AFB and go, okay, right, I know what I have to do. I've got to destroy my hive. That's okay, but we do request that you still report it. And so you can report it a few different ways. You can call the DAF call centre. You can call your local apiary officer, or you can also send me an email or give me a call, and I'll make sure that that report goes in. I'll throw another one over to you, Hamish. How often would you recommend opening up the hives and doing a brood inspection?
Oh, thanks, Rebecca. Yes, that's an important one because you can miss it if you're not thorough. So, rule of thumb, I would suggest at least a couple of times a year, maybe in the spring and through the honey flow season. So at least twice. Some people get really keen and are looking every week. Well, you know, that's fine, but it's, you know, a bit over the top. But at least a couple of times a year.
Yeah. Another question here, are beekeepers advised of AFB in their local area? Now, unfortunately, due to some of the privacy issues around that, we tend not to routinely advise that people whenever we get a report in, and it is fairly common disease, but we do keep in mind that if there is looks like a hot spot of an outbreak, we will let local clubs be informed that they need to let their members know that there is a local outbreak. And we're currently discussing ways that we might be able to keep beekeepers better informed of where AFB outbreaks are occurring.
Rebecca, may I just expand on the last question that I answered as well? It might help in that that's the recommendation a couple of times a year is for someone who isn't experiencing AFB or managing AFB in their hives. But if you have AFB and you are managing AFB in your hives, then it would be a case of inspecting every 6 to 8 weeks, so that you're letting the AFB manifest to a point where you can detect it in your hives, but not letting it go too far. So that would be a completely different case. So I just omitted that a little bit before.
Thanks, Hamish. Another question here, which I get asked quite often actually by beekeepers, is if you have honey that has come from a hive that's been infected with AFB, what can you do with that honey? Now, you can extract that honey. Keep in mind, though, that anything that you have put that frame that you're extracting onto, anything that it's touched, it's going to be transferring wax and transferring honey that is infected. So if you take it into your shed where you're extracting, you may be spreading that disease. So if you can, try and extract it away from your normal extracting equipment. In the hives that I've opened that have had some later stages of AFB, the smell would probably make you go, ooh, no, I'm not going to use that honey, but it is actually safe for people to eat. The thing to keep in mind, though, is that you need to be very careful that other bees don't have access to that honey, because then you'll be spreading AFB. So if you have honey that has been infected, make sure that it's not fed to other bees or it's not left exposed where other bees can get access to it. And I'm going to throw this one to Hamish. How common is AFB in Queensland and in particular southeast Queensland? Is it expected that most apiaries will experience this disease at some point?
Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, unfortunately, there is a high level of AFB. I probably wouldn't want to quote a percentage figure, but we are looking at a lot of people experiencing it at least once through the southeast corner. If you haven't, you're very lucky. But unfortunately, it's one of those diseases that people aren't identifying early, and with any of these things, identifying early is the key. So this is part of the process of educating to at least detect anything that looks abnormal, to get it checked out. So yeah, we have had for some years quite a high level of AFB.
Thanks, Hamish. Yeah, unfortunately, it is a pretty prevalent disease. I've got a question here about how to get your bees off your frames before you freeze them. You want to, if you're using freezing as a method of killing bees, you can shake your bees into the box to reduce the number of frames that you have that you're freezing. So, and what you do is get your frame, hold on, I've got a notebook here, and just give it a like this, shake like that, and that will get many of your bees to fall into your box. However, they may also fly off, so you might need to get a brush and brush them in as well. It's a bit of a messy job, unfortunately, and you do need to be careful that you're not letting too many bees escape, because those bees will be spreading that disease. And so in terms of getting the bees off your frames, you may be able to get some off, but you probably will need to leave some frames in there so that the bees settle in the box, so that they settle in there so you can put them then in the freezer. Hopefully that answers your question. And we've got another question here about euthanizing if we don't recommend petrol. There was a bit of interference with talk, and so I did mention a few ways to euthanize your bees, but it might have got a little bit garbled, and so I'll just go over those now. One is to put your bees in the freezer. You can put the whole box in the freezer, and if you've got that kind of space, of course, you'll almost need a very big empty deep freeze or a walk-in freezer and freeze them. Another way you can do that, euthanize them, is with soapy water. So either shaking them into a bucket of soapy water, or I've also had some people suggest to me that it can be also effective to drench them, so pouring it through the top of the hive as well to try and kill them. You can use an insecticide powder. There are insecticide powders registered for use in Queensland on bees, but only if you're going to then destroy your hives, not if you're going to sterilise and reuse them. Don't use the powder. We've got a question come through about hive beetle, and I'm going to leave that one for now because we're going to talk about hive beetle in an upcoming talk. So stay tuned there for that one. I'm going to throw this one over to you, Hamish. How much brood do you need to send in for testing?
Oh, thanks, Rebecca. Yes, there are a couple of ways you can go about it. If you are sure that you can see a diseased cell, all you need to send in that case is what you can scrape out from the cell on the end of a match. So you don't need very much material, but you do need some material that you think is obviously diseased. So that's one way, and you can just wrap that in some plastic, some cling wrap, and put it in an envelope and send it to the laboratory. The other way, if you are a little less sure of what you've got, and just generally the brood looks problematic, you can cut a section of your comb out, and probably about 10 centimetres square is the right way there, or the correct size for the laboratory to probe and get some material out of that. Probably best to just wrap that in some newspaper before you put it in your post pack to send it to the laboratory, so that it doesn't sweat too much and go mouldy during the postal time.
Thanks, Hamish. And we're going to talk a little bit more in the talk we have on sending samples to the lab about how you go about some of those preparation, both for sending an AFB sample and sending samples for other pests and diseases as well.
Rebecca, it's Susie here. Sorry, there's a question about how long AFB and EFB have been detected in Australia for, and how did the disease come over. Trevor Weatherhead is online. We're just going to see if he can hear us and if he's able to answer that question, if possible.
That would be fantastic.
Righto, European foulbrood disease. The first recorded case in Queensland was in 1950 at Killarney, but we never really got it till about 1980s when it came in. It was then New South Wales, and then it finally came into Queensland in the early 1980s. So that's when we started to get it. American foulbrood for Australia, first discovered in Queensland on the 8th of January 1931, and that's when the first Apiaries Act came in. But prior to that, in the 1880s and the 1890s, there was a lot of AFB through Victoria and South Australia, and there's records of, particularly in South Australia, where the Queensland people didn't want stuff coming in from South Australia because AFB might come in. So that's the two instances of EFB and AFB when they came to Queensland.
Thanks very much, Amy. Trevor, that's great. I'm glad you knew that one because I wasn't sure about the answer. Another question here coming in, is it more economical to just destroy a hive if it's not a flow hive than to get it irradiated? Often it is if it's not a flow hive, it can be cheaper. It depends a little bit on if your hive is very new. If it's a brand new hive, you might be about the same cost, but if you've had a hive for a while, it's got a bit old, it's starting to degrade a bit, usually it is much cheaper, unfortunately, to destroy it than and buy a new one than to get it irradiated. Here's a question. If we've got Trevor still online, I'll throw this one over to you. Does capturing a swarm present a higher risk for disease?
What was that question again, Rebecca?
Does capturing a swarm present a higher risk for disease?
Well, if you capture a swarm, there's a chance that it could have AFB in it if it has got spores there. There was work done years ago by Dr. Michael Walensky when he was doing what he calls shook. He was shooking bees from hives that had AFB, and about 15% of them came down with AFB. So in the case of a swarm, the recommendation is catch the swarm and put it into box it, and then put it into an area where you can keep an eye on it and make sure that it hasn't got disease, because some people say they won't catch swarms, but it's best to catch them and do something with them, because if you let it go and it establishes as a feral hive up in the tree and it does then come down with AFB, then it's going to affect hives within the area. So yes, you can get AFB from a swarm if it's there. There's a chance you may not, but box it, keep an eye on it, and don't introduce it to your other hives until you're pretty sure it's clean. Thanks,
Trevor. That's great advice. Question here, and I might throw this one over to Hamish. This is a bit of a tricky one, Hamish. What do you suggest if you suspect a beekeeper has AFB and is not being responsible?
Well, thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, this is important too. Probably best to phone us, the department, the apiary section, and speak to one of the apiary officers, because if that information could be passed to us, we are obliged to follow that up. It just depends on what we deem as risky, because there are varying degrees of seriousness in following up in the legislation aspect. So yeah, definitely talk to an apiary officer about that.
Thanks, Hamish. Fantastic. Someone's posted the Stereotech web page up here for us to access. So yeah, if you're interested, have a look at that one. There is some really good information about treating your hives to get them ready to send in to be irradiated. How often should you get AFB tested, and when is it a good time to test? So as Hamish mentioned before, when you check your hives for AFB, it's at least twice a year. We suggest probably more often than that if you want to make sure that you're keeping on top of that. A good time to test or to check for AFB is springtime and autumn, because those when the bees are kind of at their very active stage. They're either winding up or winding down, and good periods to get in there and have a bit of a look and see what's going on. If you're talking about sending in regular honey tests, again, we suggest that those are probably good times to be sending in. Does Trevor or Hamish have any comments on that?
No, I think you're right there. Thanks, Rebecca.
Great, thank you. got just a couple here about how often we find it. It's pretty prevalent, so I think we've covered that one. AFB and EFB are quite prevalent in Queensland, so they are found fairly regularly. Here's one I'm going to throw to you, Trevor. Does poor nutrition also cause patchy brood patterns that look like AFB or other brood diseases?
It can do that. There's a couple of other things that do give you patchy brood. One is if it's a queen that's inbred, and so if she lays eggs and the bees eat those, they're what they call diploid drones, and the bees eat them, so they end up with a patchy system. The other thing is the thing we call the muck. Looks very much like European foulbrood, but it seems to be a heavy metal poisoning. It happens in the very dry times on the acid sulfate soil, so that you think you've got EFB, but people have tried treating it with oxytetracycline and it doesn't work. But shift it on a good country and it'll go away. So there are other things that give you patchy brood, but as you indicated in your talk, there's the telltale sign of those larvae that are dead. They're the usual signs.
Thanks, Trevor. A question here around if you decide not to extract the AFB honey, can you burn the honey in the frame and then bury